Trumpet Technique for Jazzers, tricks of the trade not taught in textbooks. Now, for all of you trumpet players out there, I am always insisting and harping on a classical background because classical technique will always prepare trumpet players for the rigors of playing jazz very well. However, there are always a number of jazz-specific articulations that are not taught in the back of an Arbin's book or in Clark studies and things of this nature. And some of my favorite jazz trumpet players are master jazz trumpeters. They all had signature articulations or embellishments that made them who they are, that is the reason when they come on the radio, you know exactly who they are. So I thought it might be fun in this video to outline some of these different trumpet tricks, kind of tools, kind of little things in your arsenal that aren't necessarily tied to harmony, but are definitely trumpet jazz language that you can incorporate into your playing. And so I've taken from some of the masters here, and I've named some of these devices. So we're going to start with what I like to call the Lee Morgan. And that essentially can be wound up into double tonguing, but jazz. And when I say that, I think of Moanin', Lee Morgan with Art Blakey. It's this idea. Right? That's an idea. You immediately hear that and you say, oh gosh, Blue Train, Lee Morgan, or Moanin', Lee Morgan, right? And that is actually double tonguing in the same way that we think of classical trumpet articulation. So the double tongue is tu, the first articulation, and the second is ku, right? So tu, ku. And if you've never practiced double tonguing before, that is a very simple way to do it without the horn. Tu, ku, 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 tu, tu, right? So, right? Tu, ku, tu. I'm just double tonguing. But the way Lee Morgan would do it is two very short double tongues together and then back to regular articulation. So he wouldn't go, that sounds like a page out of the Arbin's book. No, he would just do two double tongues in quick succession. And if you do that on something real bluesy, that kind of minor blues sound, you're going to be right out of the hard bop tool chest. The second idea is what I like to call the Freddie Hubbard. And that is basically a lip trill plus a shake, right? And there's a couple different versions of this. It depends what era you're listening to Freddie Hubbard. If you listen to recordings of Freddie Hubbard from about the 1970s on, he starts to use this gimmick or this trick a lot more. And it basically is like a flow study lip slur, right? Like this. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But Freddie Hubbard would take those lip slurs and he would move them chromatically. Right? So I was just taking those lip slurs and using some false fingerings, going chromatically from note to note. But if you do that in a quick fashion, you're going to kind of get that Freddie Hubbard late 70s jazz sound. And for an extra bonus, if you add a shake on top of that lip trill, you get an even later era of Freddie Hubbard that is more of an effect, and it's less about actually playing the notes and more about the effect. That would be, say, like something like this. Right? So it's more like the note is being changed and affected by my shaking. And obviously it's not a precise thing, but it's more of an effect that you can use when your solo is reaching an emotional peak. The next idea is what I like to call the Clifford Brown. And that could also be called the Clark Terry because doodle tonguing is something that both of them did. But this is kind of the idea that you would hear even Lee Morgan do this, but really Clifford Brown kind of made it his own. And that is the idea of literally into the mouthpiece, we're saying doodle-la, 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 doodle-la. It's almost like a triple tongue, doodle-la. Doodle-la is what is going on with your tongue, right? So right? And it's almost like kind of a lazy tongue sound where you get the tongue kind of up against your teeth and kind of in and off, and it creates like an uneven articulation, almost like you're riding on a wheel, but the wheel is a little bit warped and there's a little hitch in the giddy up every time. And that is another great effect you can try on ballads. The next I like to call the Dizzy Gillespie. And that is kind of the opposite of tongue articulation. The Dizzy Gillespie, we're talking just about using your air for articulation. And that is especially effective on very up-tempo, fast lines and fast phrasing, because we know Dizzy Gillespie was doing a lot of that. So Clifford Brown, for example, would nearly articulate every note, even at fast tempos. Right? I mean, impressive, right? But Dizzy Gillespie was not wasting time getting his tongue in the way. He would just use rushes of air to mimic a tongue articulation. So he would be able to play very fast lines, and by simply using a rush of air, by simply using more air when he wanted to have articulation, he was able to do that without having his tongue get in the way. So when you think of where traditionally you might stop and use an articulation, you just simply, you push out the air faster and you make that rush of air substitute for your tongue actually being an articulation. Now we get to one of my favorite embellishments. This isn't so much an articulation as it is an embellishment. And this one I like to call the Kenny Dorham, the KD dip, the signature Kenny Dorham embellishment that he would use at the beginning or end of a phrase on one note. And this is kind of the special sauce that makes Kenny Dorham Kenny Dorham. When I say the KD dip, I mean this. Right? That was a little bit of hold, folks. Now, actually, the mechanics of this are you want to hit the note in the center of the pitch, right? And then very quickly dip back down and back up. And you want it to happen very seamlessly. So this is something you can practice by playing a scale and mimicking that Kenny Dorham center of pitch, dip, and back to center on every note in a scale. It's almost like bleh, bleh, bleh. That's what you need to think of, right? When you want to try and get that Kenny Dorham sound in there. Now, our next device is being called the Miles Davis, but really there are many other trumpet players that we could also say use this effectively. Terence Blanchard is another master of what I like to call the art of the half valve, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, I encourage you, if you want to say, hey, why is he saying Miles Davis is the half valve guy? Well, why don't you go and transcribe a dozen Miles Davis solos, listen to some recordings, and see how artfully he uses half valves and how much he uses it. Now, there's a lot that happens on the trumpet from here to here to here and to here, right? So you can play a lot of different notes and color notes in a lot of different ways just with the amount that you press the valve down. It's not just that and that. There's a lot of coloring to it. So let me give you an example. Here is a regular open E. Right? Now here is using half valve on an open note you might not think of, but we use a false fingering like E, and look what happens to the sound as I slowly use that false fingering. Right? So you find that magicness where the sound kind of gets altered somewhere in the middle. And if you use that very delicately, you can go. Right? There's some magic that can be done there. And that's just on one note. We can do the same thing. Miles, one of the favorite notes that he would often use that half valve with is on F, right on top of the staff. And there's a lot of different ways you can color that. See, again, it's about finding that sweet spot. And every trumpet is going to be different. We have different distances for all of the pistons on many different horns. And you have to find where that sweet spot is on your half valves where you can alter the sound. But listen to the magic of that. right? So if you use a more pronounced half valve, you're going to get to the note right away. But if you slowly use that half valve, you can kind of get to some of those kind of hidden undertones of each of those notes. Now we're going to continue with the Louis Armstrong, the Pop's Pop, as I like to call it. And this is when you are playing maybe styles of jazz that are a little bit earlier than, bebop and contemporary styles, and you want to channel Louis Armstrong. There are something very singular to him, and it is almost that your intonation goes sharp at the end of a note. So in the opposite of the way that Kenny Dorham kind of went, ooh, where we were dipping in, Louis Armstrong, you're going to hit the center of the pitch and then go up, almost getting sharp. And it sounds something like this. Right? All of the notes were hitting the center of the pitch and then quickly rising the pitch up. And again, it's almost getting sharp. It is. It does get sharp at the end. So same way that we practice the scale with Kenny Dorham, we can practice the scale with Louis Armstrong. Right? And there's another Louis Armstrong, because he is the godfather of all jazz trumpet language. We can't just have one from him, right? The second singular Louis Armstrong articulation is what I call lip trill vibrato. And this is different than what we were doing before with Freddie Hubbard. This was literally Louis Armstrong's just vibrato was so strong, and he had such command of the instrument that his vibrato, which was wide in that style, would often go to the next partial up. I am convinced it was unintentional. It was just because he had so much control. So this is something that is almost like a classical etude that you can practice to get that lip trill at the end of your notes. Right? You saw me going for it. Basically, what you want to do is when you get to these notes where you're using a vibrato, make it a lip trill, right? And you can start quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, 16th notes. Right? And just keep going up all the partials you can until your range is, uncomfortable. But that's a way to really capture that sound, that essence, the magic of Louis Armstrong when you're playing a little bit earlier jazz tunes, When the Saints Go Marching In, Bourbon Street Parade, Indiana as opposed to Donnelly, After You've Gone, things of this nature. Another one of my favorite techniques here is what I like to call the Roy Eldridge. And that is a hum while you're playing. The effect is a low buzz, not a full growl, but a buzz. And all you have to do that is sing into the mouthpiece while you play. And it creates that little buzz in your sound. Right? That is a really fun effect. And what I like to follow that up with is actually the use of a full growl for effect on a note. And that's what I like to call the Nicholas Payton, because this is something that on a bunch of my favorite records, Nick would use to great effect. And the way you do that is literally a growl, right? You want, Ugh! You want to make like you're a panther or you're a mountain lion. Ugh! And you do that into the mouthpiece. Ugh! And this is actually going to be a more drastic effect than the Roy Eldridge, which was just a simple hum. Right? Anytime you want to get real dirty with the blues, that is an effective way to do it. Use that Nicholas Payton, use that growl. And now, of course, the final technique can be attributed to many great wind instrumentalists, not just trumpet players. Of course, we may have to give a slight nod, as much as we are reticent to do so, to maybe Kenny G, because he's a master of this. But for our purposes, trumpet, we're going to go with this one being called the Winton. And that is, of course, circular breathing. This was taught to me by my teacher in college. And you'd be surprised at how many times it actually can be used in a musical way. Actually, for me, oftentimes it may in fact be in a big band where I'm playing fourth trumpet and I'm just reading whole notes that are tied together. Rather than try and cheat and find a place to breathe, you can circular breathe. So the easiest way I can teach circular breathing to you is to as training wheels, manually push the air out of your cheeks while you're breathing in. Because obviously what we need to create to circular breathe is to have a continuous airflow going into the mouthpiece. So, of course, you say, well, I can't play into the mouthpiece and breathe in at the same time. When you circular breathe, what happens is you're pushing in with all of your air, but then you fill up your cheeks with air, and that air that enters your cheeks is the air that goes through the horn while you're breathing back in. So before you can get the mechanism down to do it naturally, literally take your hands, put them on your cheeks, and push that air out of your cheeks when you breathe in. So it's like this, right? I breathe in, I have no air left in here, and I go. So every time I push the air out of my cheeks, I breathe in through my nose. Right? So then you simply do that into the mouthpiece. Right? And it might sound like that for a while. I wasn't quite finding the pitch, right? It's difficult to get that down, but what it sounds like when you end up doing it on a note is this. Right? So obviously you can hear when I'm transferring the air from the cheeks to the horn, and that's something that takes a lot of practice, and Wynton can do so seamlessly you barely can even tell when he's breathing in and when he's breathing out. But there you go. There's circular breathing as a nice little cherry on top of all these other incredible trumpet techniques, tricks of the trade, tools in your trumpet toolbox. Thanks.